Jacob Harlan stood on the platform, the Montana wind biting at his skin like a cornered wolf. The noon train was coming, its whistle a lonely cry against the endless gray sky. He wasn't here for himself. He was here for his friend, Ethan McCready. He was here to pick up a mail-order bride, a beautiful young woman named Marianne Whitfield, with golden curls and a smile that could melt the December snow. Ethan had shown Jacob the photograph 100 times, his eyes shining with a desperate kind of hope. He'd paid a fortune for her passage, for the promise of a new life. But Jacob had a bad feeling, a knot in his gut that had been tightening for days. He'd seen these arrangements go sour before. Men who weren't what they claimed to be. Women who looked nothing like their pretty pictures. Still, Ethan was his friend, the closest thing to a brother he had. So Jacob waited, his collar pulled high, squinting through the swirling snow as the passengers began to step off the train. He scanned the crowd for golden curls, for the face from the photograph. Then he saw her, and it wasn't her. The woman who hesitated at the top of the train steps was wrong. Her dress was plain brown, patched and worn. Her hair, pulled back in a tight, severe bun, was a dark chestnut, not gold, and she was older. Maybe 30, maybe more. Life had already carved its story into the lines around her eyes and mouth. She carried a single, beaten-up carpet bag and looked utterly, hopelessly lost. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, scanned the platform with a raw anxiety that Jacob felt in his own chest. Those eyes met his. For a second, a flicker of hope lit her face. Then just as quickly, it died when he didn't move toward her. Jacob looked away, still searching, still hoping the real Marianne was just a few steps behind. But as the platform cleared and the final passengers hurried away, the golden-haired girl never appeared. Only the woman in brown remained, shivering in the cold, clutching a thin shawl that was no match for the Montana winter. Something twisted inside him. He couldn't just leave her there. He walked over, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gruff, "are you waiting for someone?" She looked up, and up close, he could see the specks of blue in her stormy gray eyes. There was a dignity in the way she held herself, a straightness in her spine that defied the hardship written on her face. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm looking for Mr. Ethan McCready." Jacob's stomach dropped to the floor. "You're, Miss Whitfield." A faint blush colored her pale cheeks. "I am Eleanor Whitfield," she said quietly, "Marianne's sister." The words hung in the freezing air between them, a promise broken before it was ever made. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was a deception, and Jacob was standing right in the middle of it. "Where's Marianne?" he asked, trying to piece it together. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the handle of her worn bag. She couldn't come. I've come in her place." In her place? What did that even mean? Ethan had paid for a young, beautiful bride. He'd mortgaged a piece of his future for the woman in that photograph. He wasn't expecting her tired older sister. This was a disaster, a full-blown frontier catastrophe just waiting to happen. "Ethan sent me to collect his bride," Jacob said, the words feeling like rocks in his mouth. "I'm Jacob Harlan, his neighbor." Her shoulders sagged, a tiny, almost imperceptible slump of defeat. "Then perhaps you could take me to him, Mr. Harlan. I have come a very long way." The ride to Ethan's ranch was 2 hours of frozen silence. Jacob had given her a thick wool blanket, but he could still see her shivering. He kept stealing glances at her, at the small, faded scar on her cheek, at her hands rough and chapped from work. She wasn't the delicate flower from the picture. This woman had seen things. She had survived things. There was a strength in her that Marianne's pretty face could never convey. "I suppose you'd like an explanation," she said finally, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "It's not my business," Jacob grunted. "That's between you and Ethan." "Still," she insisted, "you deserve to know." She told him a story about their father dying, about debts and desperation, about her younger sister, Marianne, seeing Ethan's advertisement as an adventure, a way out. But then just 2 weeks before she was supposed to leave, Marianne had met someone else, a young, handsome clerk. She'd fallen in love. "She begged me to help her," Eleanor said, her eyes fixed on the gray horizon. She couldn't marry Mr. McCready, not when she loved another. So you came instead, Jacob said. It wasn't a question. I had nothing keeping me in Boston, she whispered. I'm 32, Mr. Harlan, long past the age for marriage. I hoped Mr. McCready might accept me instead. I can work. I'm not afraid of hard work. Jacob didn't know what to say. He could understand the desperate logic of it. Two sisters backed into a corner, trying to survive. But he also knew Ethan. He knew the pride and the hope his friend had pinned on this marriage. As they crested the last hill and Ethan's ranch came into view, a knot of dread formed in Jacob's stomach. Ethan was already on the porch, his face lit up with a huge, eager grin. He waved, his whole body trembling with anticipation. The moment Ethan's eyes fell on Eleanor, his smile didn't just fade, it shattered. It crumbled into a million pieces, leaving behind a mask of cold, sharp disbelief. He stared at the woman Jacob was helping down from the wagon, his hand still half raised in a wave that would never be completed. Where is she? Ethan's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. Where's Mary Ann? Eleanor stood her ground, her chin held high, though Jacob could see the tremor in her hands. Mr. McCready, I'm Eleanor Whitfield, Mary Ann's sister. I've come. I didn't pay for Mary Ann's sister, Ethan exploded, stepping off the porch, his boots hitting the frozen earth like hammers. I paid for Mary Ann. Young, beautiful Mary Ann. He gestured at Eleanor, his face twisting with a disgust so potent it was almost a physical blow. Not some worn-out spinster. Jacob's jaw clenched. Ethan! Stay out of this, Jake! Ethan's eyes were locked on Eleanor, burning with rage and humiliation. She's married, Eleanor said, her voice shaking but steady. She fell in love. I've come in her place. I can do everything she promised. I can cook, clean. Ethan's laugh was a bark of pure cruelty. You think I wanted a cook? I can hire a cook. I wanted a wife, a pretty wife, someone to give me sons, someone to be proud of. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on the gray in her hair, the lines on her face. You're old, used up. What am I supposed to do with you? By now the ranch hands had started to gather, drawn by the shouting. They stood in a loose circle, their faces a mixture of pity and cruel amusement. Jacob saw Tom Hadley and Will Carson smirking, already sensing blood in the water. Looks like you got the wrong package delivered, boss, Tom called out, and a few of the men snickered. Eleanor's face was chalk white, but she didn't flinch. She just stood there, straight and tall, taking it all in. The humiliation, the laughter, the utter rejection. She was a ship breaking apart on the rocks, and everyone was just watching it happen. Please, she said, her voice a fragile whisper. I've traveled 2,000 miles. I have nowhere else to go. You think I'm going to let everyone laugh at me? Ethan roared. After I've been showing her picture to the whole county? You think I'm going to settle for her dried-up older sister? The crowd was growing now. Word traveled fast on the frontier, and the scent of a scandal traveled even faster. Riders from other ranches, people passing on the road, they all stopped to watch the show. I believe there's been some mistake, a smooth voice cut in. Samuel Morrison, the town banker, pushed through the crowd, his slick city clothes looking out of place. His smile was predatory. This can't be the bride you've been boasting about, McCready. This woman looks like she should be someone's grandmother. The laughter that followed was ugly. It was the sound of a pack of dogs turning on a wounded animal. That was the blow that finally broke her. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her pale cheek. She wiped it away angrily, but it was too late. The crack in her composure had shown. I'll go, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. If someone could just take me back to town. And then what? Ethan sneered. You got any money? Or did you and your sister spend all the passage money I sent? I have no money, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, Mr. McCready. I truly am. You thought wrong, he spat, turning his back on her. Get her out of here, Jake. I don't care where she goes. Just get her off my land. The crowd started to drift away, their entertainment over. Eleanor bent to pick up her bag, her movements slow and stiff, as if her bones had turned to glass. You can't just send her off, Jacob said, his voice low and tight. It's December. She'll freeze to death. Not my problem, Ethan said without looking back. Jacob looked at Eleanor, standing alone in the snow, a ghost in a worn brown dress. He looked at the smirking faces of the ranch hands, at the cold, judgmental eyes of the townsfolk. And in that moment, something inside him snapped. He'd seen enough cruelty in his life. He wasn't going to stand by and watch this. Before he even knew what he was going to say, the words were out of his mouth. She can stay at my place. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Ethan spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief. Eleanor looked up, shock and something else. Something fragile and hopeful, dawning on her face. Tom Hadley let out a disbelieving laugh. Jake, you getting so desperate you're taking Ethan's leftovers? I have an empty foreman's cabin, Jacob said, his voice like stone, ignoring them all. She can stay there until she figures things out. You're making a mistake, Jake, Ethan warned. Don't come to me when she causes you trouble. I'm not expecting anything from you, Jacob said, picking up Eleanor's bag. Ma'am, if you'll get back in the wagon. She hesitated, looking from Jacob's stony face to the hostile crowd. Mr. Harlan, I couldn't possibly impose. You're not imposing, he said, his voice softer than he intended. I'm offering. She looked into his eyes, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because she gave a small, shaky nod. As Jacob helped her back onto the wagon, he could feel their stares, hear their whispers. By morning, the whole county would know. Jacob Harlan, the quiet widower, had taken in Ethan McCready's rejected bride. As they drove away, he heard one last shout carry on the wind. Wonder what he thinks he's going to do with her. He glanced at Eleanor, sitting stiffly beside him, silent tears now streaming down her face. He wondered the same thing himself. All he knew was that he couldn't leave her to the wolves. He'd just have to hope he hadn't brought one home. The cabin wasn't much, just a single room with a bed, a table, and a cold stove. But it was sturdy, and it was shelter. It's warm once the stove gets going, Jacob said, setting her bag down. Eleanor stepped inside, her gray eyes taking in everything. It's more than I deserve, Mr. Harland. Thank you. He busied himself lighting the fire, avoiding her gaze. The gratitude in her voice made him uncomfortable. He wasn't a hero. He'd just done what any decent man should have. I'll bring over some supplies, he said gruffly. Blankets, food. You're welcome to join us for meals at the main house. I don't want to cause any more trouble, she said, her voice small. You won't, he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it was a lie. Trouble had already arrived. His foreman, Red Murphy, was waiting on the porch when he got back to the main house. Boss, Red said, his face carefully neutral, heard about what happened at McCready's. News travels fast. Always does. Red shifted his weight. The boys are wondering about the woman. She's a guest, Jacob said firmly. That's all anyone needs to know. You make sure they understand that. Red nodded slowly. Yes, sir. But you might want to know. Tom Hadley's already saying you've gone soft, taking in strays. Tom Hadley can mind his own damn business, Jacob snapped. The next morning at breakfast, the tension in the cookhouse was thick enough to cut with a knife. The 8 men who worked his ranch fell silent when he walked in. Tom Hadley was whispering to Will Carson at the far end of the table, a smug grin on his face. Before Jacob could say anything, the door opened. Eleanor stood there. She'd washed her face and pulled her hair back neatly. She looked tired, but she wasn't broken. Good morning, she said quietly. Mr. Harlan said I might join you. Red stood up and offered her his seat. The cook, a grizzled old man everyone just called Cookie, slapped a plate of beans and biscuits in front of her without a word. The silence was deafening. So, Tom Hadley said loudly, breaking it, you're the one who came instead of the pretty sister. Eleanor's hand tightened on her coffee cup. Must have been a real disappointment for old Ethan, Tom went on, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Man orders a thoroughbred and gets a broken-down mule instead. Tom, Jacob's voice was a low warning. Just making conversation, boss. Tom smirked. I'm sure Miss Whitfield understands. Eleanor set down her cup. She looked directly at Tom, her stormy eyes clear and steady. I understand perfectly, Mr. Hadley, she said, her voice calm and level. I understand that you're the kind of man who finds pleasure in the misfortune of others. It is a common enough trait, though not an admirable one. Tom's face turned a blotchy red. You got a sharp tongue for someone living on charity. And you have poor manners for someone eating at your employer's table, she retorted without missing a beat. A few of the other men choked back laughter. Jacob hid his own smile behind his coffee cup. This woman had more fight in her than he'd realized. Later that day, she found him by the corral. Mr. Harlan, she said, I cannot simply accept your charity. I must earn my keep. I can cook, I can clean, I can mend clothes. Please, let me work. He saw the pride in her eyes, the desperate need to have some control, some purpose. All right, he agreed. Cookie can always use a hand. Over the next few days, Eleanor slipped into the rhythm of the ranch. She worked from dawn till dusk, never complaining, meeting the men's lingering hostility with a quiet dignity that slowly began to wear them down. She was a phantom in a brown dress, mending torn shirts, baking bread that reminded Jacob of his mother's, bringing a strange sense of order to their rough, masculine world. He found himself watching her, the efficient way she kneaded dough, the soft, sad way she hummed old hymns while she worked. He started leaving things for her, a stack of fresh firewood by her door each morning, a thick wool shawl he claimed he'd found in an old trunk. One afternoon, he came back early from checking fence lines and found Tom Hadley cornering her by the well. Come on now, Tom was saying, his voice slimy, standing way too close. A woman in your situation? You must be grateful for any attention. Please step back, Mr. Hadley. Eleanor's voice was tight, but she didn't back down. Or what? Tom sneered. You'll run to Harland? We all know why he's keeping you around. Man gets lonely. Tom. Jacob's voice cut through the air like a razor. Tom spun around, his face going pale. Boss, I was just... Pack your things, Jacob said, his voice dangerously calm. You're done here. Tom's face twisted into an ugly sneer. You're firing me? Over her? Over this dried up... Jacob moved faster than Tom could have imagined. 1 second, Hadley was talking. The next, he was on the ground, blood pouring from his nose. An hour, Jacob repeated, flexing his bruised knuckles. Get off my land. After Tom had gone, Eleanor stood by the well, trembling. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. I've dealt with worse. Not on my land, Jacob said. Not while you're under my protection. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted in those stormy gray eyes. Your protection? She repeated softly. Is that what I'm under? Yes, he said, the word coming out rougher than he'd intended. For as long as you need it. That night he stood on his porch, watching the single light burning in her cabin window. He thought about the way she'd looked at him, the way his name sounded on her lips, and he realized with a jolt that went straight through him that he was in deep, deep trouble. He wasn't just protecting her out of pity anymore. He was protecting her because the thought of anyone hurting her made him see red. Jacob Harland, who had locked his heart away 5 years ago when he buried his wife, was starting to feel something for the wrong sister, and he had no idea what to do about it. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was the nagging feeling that her story, the story about Marianne and the handsome clerk, didn't add up. There was something she wasn't telling him, a secret hidden behind those sad, stormy eyes, a secret that might be far more dangerous than a disappointed groom or a crew of hostile ranch hands. 3 weeks later, Jacob had to go to town for supplies. He didn't want to take Eleanor, didn't want to subject her to the stares and whispers. But she insisted. I can't hide forever, Mr. Harland, she'd said, her chin set at that stubborn angle he was starting to know well. I have to face them sometime. The town of Bitter Creek was just as bad as he'd feared. Every head turned as they walked down the main street. He could feel their judgment like a physical weight. That's her, a woman muttered, not even bothering to lower her voice. The one who tried to trick poor Ethan McCready. Shameless, her friend replied. Living out at the Harlan place now. You know what that means. Eleanor kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, but Jacob could see the color rising in her cheeks. Inside Morrison's general store, the clerk, a weaselly man named Hutchkins, gave them a sour look. "Harlan," he said, pointedly ignoring Eleanor. "Mrs. Whitfield has a list," Jacob said, his voice flat. Hutchkins pursed his lips. "Afraid we don't extend credit to temporary residents." "I'm not asking for credit," Eleanor said, her voice tight but level. "Mr. Harland is paying." "Even so," Hutchkins sniffed, "Mr. Morrison has instructed me to be careful. We have a reputation to uphold." Just then, the bell on the door chimed, and Adelaide Morrison, the banker's wife, swept in. She was a woman who wore her superiority like a fine silk dress. Her eyes landed on Eleanor with the kind of undisguised contempt that could strip paint. "Mr. Hutchkins," she said, her voice like cracking ice, "surely you aren't serving this woman. We must maintain standards in this town." Eleanor stood a little straighter. "I only require flour, salt, and thread. I fail to see how that compromises anyone's standards." Adelaide let out a short, sharp laugh. "My dear, your very presence compromises standards. A woman of your advanced age, attempting to deceive a good man like Ethan McCready, and now living in sin with another. It's a disgrace." "That's enough," Jacob growled, stepping forward. But Eleanor put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "No," she said softly. "Let her speak." Adelaide's eyes glittered with malice. "Everyone knows the truth. You came here under false pretenses, and when that God-fearing man rightfully rejected you, you latched onto the first lonely widower you could find." "What I see," Jacob cut in, his voice ringing through the silent store, "is a woman worth 10 of you, Adelaide Morrison." Adelaide's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "How dare you?" "I dare because it's the truth," Jacob said, pulling out his money pouch and slamming it on the counter. "Hutchkins, fill her order. Now, or I'll take my business, and the business of every man who works for me, down the street to Carson's." Hutchkins, caught between the banker's wife and one of his biggest customers, swallowed hard and started grabbing items off the shelves. As they were leaving, a small boy ran up to them. He was maybe 7 years old, with bright, curious eyes. "Aunt Eleanor," he said, tugging on her dress, "is it you?" A young woman, the boy's mother, hurried after him, looking nervous. "Timothy, come away from there." Eleanor's face softened. "Timothy Reed? My goodness, look how you've grown." She looked at his mother. "Sarah, I didn't know you'd come west." Sarah Reed glanced nervously at the disapproving faces watching them. We heard you were here," she stammered. "I'm so sorry about everything." Then, finding a bit of courage, she looked at the crowd. "This woman," she said, her voice gaining strength, "she brought us bread from the bakery where she worked when my husband was sick and we had nothing. She never asked for a penny. She showed us a kindness none of you fine people would have bothered with." Adelaide Morrison just sniffed. "Birds of a feather, I suppose. The desperate and the disgraced." She swept out of the store, leaving a thick, uncomfortable silence in her wake. On the ride home, Eleanor was quiet, cradling a small, crudely carved wooden horse that little Timothy had pressed into her hand. "Why do you do it?" she asked finally. "Stand up for me like that? It only brings you trouble." Jacob stared at the road ahead, his knuckles white on the reins. He told her then about his wife, Sarah, about how she died of consumption, and how, in the end, the townspeople had avoided them, afraid of the sickness, afraid of death. "She died lonely," he said, his voice rough with old pain. "I swore I'd never stand by and watch someone be cast out like that again. Not if I could help it." "I'm not dying, Mr. Harlan," she said softly. "No," he agreed, turning to look at her, really look at her. "But they're making you feel like you don't deserve to live, and that's its own kind of death." That night, a blizzard rolled in, trapping them in the main house. The wind howled like a banshee, and the snow piled up in massive drifts against the doors and windows. They were cut off from the world. It was just Jacob, Eleanor, and his men, a small island of humanity in a sea of white. The close quarters frayed everyone's nerves. After 2 days, the men were getting restless, and Jacob could feel the tension ratcheting up. He found Eleanor in the kitchen late one night, unable to sleep. She was staring out the window at the swirling snow, her face pale in the lamplight. It reminds me of the night our father died, she said without turning around. The wind sounded just like that. You were close to him? Jacob asked, pouring them both a cup of coffee. She gave a small, bitter laugh. No, he was a hard man. A gambler. He's the reason we had nothing but debts when he was gone. She finally turned to face him, her eyes dark with secrets. Mr. Harland, Jacob, the story I told you about Marianne, it wasn't the truth. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest. He just nodded, waiting. There was no handsome clerk, she said, her voice barely a whisper. That was a lie. The truth is, Marianne is in trouble. Deep trouble. She explained that her sister hadn't seen Ethan's ad as an adventure, but as a last resort. Marianne had gotten involved with a dangerous man in Boston, a man connected to the city's criminal underworld. She owed him money, a lot of money. He threatened her, Eleanor said, her hands trembling. He said if she didn't pay, he would sell her to one of those awful houses. Ethan's passage money was supposed to be her escape. But this man, he found out. He took the money and said it wasn't enough. He said he was coming for her. So you came instead, Jacob breathed, the pieces finally clicking into place. You sent her into hiding and took her place, hoping this man would think she'd gone west and stop looking. Eleanor nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I had to protect her. She's my sister. But I never imagined the kind of humiliation I would face here, or the kindness. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and real. It changed everything. She wasn't a desperate spinster who had deceived his friend. She was a brave woman who had sacrificed her own reputation, her own safety, to save her sister. Does this man have a name? Jacob asked, his voice grim. They call him Silas Kane, she whispered, and I'm terrified he'll figure out what I've done and come looking for me. Or worse, that he'll find Marianne. Jacob reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold as ice. He won't, he said, his voice a low, steady promise. If he comes here, he'll have to get through me first. In that moment, surrounded by the storm, Jacob knew he was lost. He was falling for this brave, broken, beautiful woman, and he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that her troubles were now his. The blizzard raging outside was nothing compared to the storm that was coming for them. The blizzard broke after 4 days, leaving behind a world of stunning, silent white. But the peace didn't last. A rider struggled through the drifts with a message from a neighboring ranch. Ethan McCready's cattle were starving. He hadn't laid in enough winter feed, and the deep snow had covered what little grazing was left. His pride wouldn't let him ask for help, but his foreman had sent out the word. Jacob organized a relief party, his own men and a few from other ranches, loading up wagons with hay. He didn't want to do it. After the way Ethan had treated Eleanor, his first instinct was to let the man rot, but he couldn't let the animal suffer. When they arrived at the McCready place, it was a scene of desperation. Cattle stood hunched and miserable, their ribs showing. Ethan himself looked like a ghost. He was gaunt, his eyes wild and sunken. The humiliation of Eleanor's arrival had clearly broken something inside him. He didn't thank Jacob. He just watched with a resentful glare as they unloaded the hay. You think this makes you a better man than me, Harland? He snarled. Coming here to lord your charity over me? I'm here for the cattle, Ethan, Jacob said tiredly. That's all. As they were leaving, one of Ethan's hands, a young kid, pulled Jacob aside. It's bad, Mr. Harlan, the boy whispered, casting a nervous glance toward the house. The boss, he's been drinking heavy and talking about getting back what's his. He blames you and the woman. A chill went down Jacob's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. A desperate man was a dangerous man. And Ethan McCready was a very desperate man. Jacob posted a watch that night and the night after. The threat from Ethan felt real and close, but the attack when it came wasn't from Ethan. It was a moonless night, a week later. The dogs started barking, a frantic, savage sound. Jacob grabbed his rifle and was out the door in a second. 3 men were by the corral, trying to scatter the horses. They weren't ranch hands. They were city men, dressed in dark clothes, their faces hard and unfamiliar. Who the hell are you? Jacob shouted, leveling his rifle. One of them turned, a cruel smile on his face. Silas Kane sends his regards, he said, and raised his pistol. The night exploded in gunfire. Jacob's men, woken by the dogs, came pouring out of the bunkhouse, and the fight was on. These men weren't trying to steal horses. They were trying to send a message, a bloody one. In the middle of the chaos, Jacob saw Eleanor run from her cabin toward the main house. One of Cain's men saw her too. He broke off from the fight and went after her, grabbing her by the arm. "We have what we came for," the man shouted to his partners. "Let's go." They were trying to take her. Jacob felt a primal rage surge through him. He fired, his shot going wide in the darkness. He started running toward her, but he was too far away. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows of the main house. It was Cookie, the old camp cook, holding a massive cast-iron skillet. With a roar, he brought it down on the head of the man holding Eleanor. The man dropped like a sack of rocks. The other two thugs, seeing their friend go down and realizing they were now badly outnumbered, fled into the darkness. Jacob ran to Eleanor, who was staring in shock at the unconscious man at her feet. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands checking her for injuries. She just nodded, her eyes wide. They dragged the man into the house and tied him to a chair. When he came to, Jacob stood in front of him, his face like thunder. "You have one chance to tell me why you're here," he said, his voice deadly calm. The man, his head bleeding, just spat on the floor. "Cain wants the girl. He knows she's the sister. He wants to know where the real prize is." So it was true. Cain knew Marianne was in hiding, and he thought Eleanor was the key to finding her. "Where is he?" Jacob demanded. The man just laughed, a broken gurgling sound. "Closer than you think." A sudden, horrifying thought struck Jacob. How did Cain find them? How did he know Eleanor was here, on this isolated ranch in the middle of Montana? Someone must have told him. Someone from Bitter Creek. Someone who knew the whole story of her arrival. And then he knew. The banker, Samuel Morrison, the man who had sneered at Eleanor in his store, the man who held the note on Ethan's failing ranch. The next morning, Jacob rode into town, the captured thug tied to his horse. He left the man with the sheriff and then walked into the bank. Morrison was sitting behind his big desk, looking smug. "Harland," he said smoothly, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "You can drop the act, Morrison," Jacob said, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "I know you're the one who contacted Silas Kane." Morrison's face went pale. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Your clerk, Hutchkins, is a talkative man when he's scared," Jacob bluffed. "He told me all about the letters you've been sending back east. You knew who Eleanor was. You knew about her sister. You told Kane where to find her." The banker started to sweat. "It was just business. Kane offered a finder's fee, a substantial one." "You brought a gang of violent criminals to my doorstep," Jacob said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You put the woman I'm protecting in danger. This is more than business now. It's personal." Jacob leaned across the desk, his face inches from Morrison's. "You're going to send a message to your friend Kane. You're going to tell him the deal is off. You're going to tell him that if he or any of his men ever set foot in this valley again, they won't be leaving alive. Do you understand me?" Morrison, his eyes wide with terror, could only nod. As Jacob rode home, he knew this wasn't over. He'd scared Morrison, but a man like Silas Kane wouldn't be scared off so easily. He had turned his ranch into a fortress, but for how long? And looming over it all was another, even bigger threat. The snows were finally melting, but the spring rains hadn't come. The creek was low. The grass was turning brown before it even had a chance to grow green. A drought was coming, a long, hard drought that would test them all. And out there, somewhere, Silas Kane was waiting for his moment to strike. The ranch had become a powder keg, and Jacob knew it was only a matter of time before someone lit the fuse. The spring that followed was a cruel joke. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the earth into a cracked, barren wasteland. The creek dried up to a muddy trickle. Cattle grew thin, their lowing a constant, miserable sound that scraped on the nerves. Every rancher in the valley was struggling, but Jacob knew his situation was worse. He had more mouths to feed, and now he had the added expense of keeping his men on high alert, watching for any sign of Silas Kane or his thugs. The tension was a living thing, a poison that seeped into everything. Eleanor worked tirelessly, managing their dwindling supplies with a skill that amazed him. She never complained, but he saw the worry in her eyes, the way she looked at the brassy, cloudless sky. She had started a small garden near the house, hauling buckets of water from the nearly dry well to keep the fragile plants alive. It was a small act of defiance against the dying land. Their relationship had changed. The lines of employer and guest, protector and victim, had blurred into something deeper, more complicated. They worked together like a team, a husband and wife, finding comfort in the shared struggle. The unspoken feelings between them were a constant humming presence, a source of both strength and torment. One sweltering afternoon, Eleanor was in her garden when she felt it, a sharp, twisting pain in her abdomen that made her gasp and drop her watering can. She pressed a hand to her stomach, waiting for it to pass, but it came again, stronger this time. She'd been feeling unwell for weeks, blaming it on the heat and the worry. But this was different. This was something else entirely. With a growing sense of dread, she made her way back to her cabin, her legs unsteady. An hour later, her worst fears were confirmed. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a physical blow. A child, Jacob's child. The result of one single, desperate night during the blizzard when fear and loneliness and unspoken desire had finally overwhelmed them. She had pushed it from her mind, told herself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness that would never be repeated. But now the consequences were undeniable. She was carrying the child of a man she was not married to, a man who had taken her in out of pity. How could she tell him? How could she add this scandal, this burden, to everything else he was facing? The drought, the threat from Cain, the financial strain, and now this, a bastard child, in a town that had already condemned her. She kept her secret for as long as she could, her loose work dresses hiding her changing shape. But the morning sickness was undeniable, and she knew Cookie, with his sharp old eyes, was watching her with a knowing, sympathetic gaze. The drought worsened. Jacob was forced to start selling off cattle, taking huge losses just to cut down the size of the herd they could no longer feed or water. His face grew leaner, the lines around his eyes deeper. The stress was wearing him down, and Eleanor's secret felt like a betrayal, a stone she was adding to his already heavy load. The breaking point came with the fire. It started in the dead of night, in the tinder-dry grasslands at the far edge of his property. It wasn't lightning, it was arson, a deliberate act of sabotage. Jacob and his men fought it for 2 days and 2 nights, a desperate, losing battle against a wall of flame. Eleanor worked alongside them, hauling water, tending to the burned and exhausted men, until she finally collapsed from smoke inhalation and exhaustion. When she woke up, she was in her bed, and Jacob was sitting beside her, his face black with soot, his eyes red-rimmed and full of despair. They had lost nearly a third of their grazing land and 24 head of cattle. "It was Morrison's doing," he said, his voice a dead monotone. "He's trying to break us, trying to force us to sell." Eleanor looked at his defeated face, at the ruin the fire had made of his land and his hope, and she knew she couldn't keep her secret any longer. "Jacob," she said, her voice trembling, "there's something I have to tell you." She told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush of fear and shame. She didn't look at him, just stared at her hands, waiting for the anger, the disgust, the rejection. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. Are you sure?" "Yes," she whispered. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. She held her breath, her heart feeling like it was about to shatter. This was it. This was the moment he would tell her to leave. He had taken on her troubles, defended her, protected her. But this was too much. A child, an illegitimate child. The final, unforgivable scandal. "All this time," he said, his voice rough, "you've been carrying this by yourself." He turned around, and the look on his face wasn't anger. It was something else entirely, a kind of raw, aching tenderness that stole her breath. "Eleanor," he said, walking back to the bed and kneeling beside it. He took her hand, his calloused thumb stroking her skin. "This isn't a burden. Do you hear me? This is a miracle." Tears streamed down her face. tears of shock and overwhelming relief. But your reputation, the town, to hell with the town, he said fiercely. To hell with my reputation. He placed his other hand gently on her still flat stomach. This is our child, ours, and we will raise him on this land together. In that moment, the drought, the fire, the threats from outside, they all seemed to fade away. All that mattered was the man kneeling beside her, the man who had looked at what she thought was her greatest shame and called it a miracle. But their moment of peace was short-lived. The next day, a writer came with news that turned their world upside down once more. A woman had arrived in Bitter Creek on the morning stagecoach, a young, beautiful woman with golden curls, looking for her sister. Marianne had come to Montana, and she hadn't come alone. Silas Kane was with her. He hadn't sent his thugs this time. He had come himself to collect his debt, and he had brought his leverage with him. Jacob and Eleanor rode into Bitter Creek looking like avenging angels from a different, harder world. The drought and the constant threat had stripped them down to their essential selves, lean, tough, and radiating a dangerous intensity. They found Marianne in a room at the hotel, with two of Kane's men posted outside the door. She was a ghost of the girl from the photograph. Her beautiful face was bruised, her eyes filled with a terror so profound it was almost paralyzing. Silas Kane was sitting in a chair across from her, calmly cleaning his fingernails with a Bowie knife. He was a surprisingly plain-looking man, which only made him seem more menacing. "Ah, the happy couple," he said, smiling as Jacob and Eleanor entered. "And the prodigal sister. We were just having a chat." "Let her go, Kane," Jacob said, his hand never leaving his gun. Kane chuckled. "All in good time. First, we have a business matter to discuss. You see, Mary Ann here still owes me a considerable sum, and since she appears to be insolvent, I've decided to transfer her debt to her loving older sister." He looked at Eleanor, his eyes cold and dead. "You will pay me what she owes, with interest." "I have no money," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "Oh, I think you do," Kane said smoothly. "Or at least, your man here does. The Harlan Ranch, a fine piece of property. Or it will be once the rains come back. You will sign the deed over to me. In exchange, I will let you all walk away." "You're insane," Jacob scoffed. "Am I?" Kane's smile widened. He nodded to one of his men who grabbed Marianne by the hair and pulled her to her feet. She cried out in pain. "The deed, Harlan, or the girl's pretty face gets a permanent new smile." "Don't do it, Jacob," Marianne sobbed. "He'll kill you all anyway." Suddenly, the door to the hotel room burst open. Ethan McCready stood there, a shotgun in his hands, his face a mask of insane fury. The drought and the booze had pushed him over the edge. "She was supposed to be mine," he screamed, his eyes locked on Marianne. "You all ruined it." He leveled the shotgun, not at Kane, but at Jacob. In that split second of confusion, everything happened at once. Jacob shoved Eleanor to the floor, drawing his own gun. Kane lunged for Marianne, using her as a shield. Ethan fired the shotgun, the blast tearing a huge hole in the wall where Jacob's head had been moments before. The hotel room erupted into a whirlwind of violence. Kane's men drew their guns. Jacob returned fire. Eleanor, on the floor, saw Ethan fumbling to reload his shotgun, his eyes still burning with a mad hatred. From outside, she heard shouting. The sheriff and his deputies, alerted by the gunfire, were surrounding the hotel. It was a death trap, a bloody, chaotic mess. And in the middle of it all was the realization of what she had to do. While the men were locked in their deadly dance, Eleanor crawled toward her sister. Marianne was on the floor, half hidden behind an overturned table, paralyzed with fear. "We have to go," Eleanor hissed, grabbing her arm. "Now!" She pulled her sister toward the window. It overlooked a narrow alleyway. It was their only chance. As another volley of gunfire exploded behind them, Eleanor smashed the window pane with a chair leg. "Go!" she screamed at Marianne. "Get out of here and don't look back!" But just as Marianne was scrambling through the broken window, one of Kane's men saw them. He took aim at Marianne's back. Without a second's thought, Eleanor threw herself in front of her sister. The gun fired. A searing, white-hot pain exploded in her shoulder. The force of the bullet threw her back against the wall, and she slid to the floor, the world starting to go gray at the edges. Through the haze of pain, she saw Jacob's face, a mask of fury and terror, as he shot the man who had shot her. She saw the sheriff's men burst into the room. She heard more shots, more screaming, but it was all fading, a distant, meaningless noise. Her last conscious thought was of the child inside her, the tiny, miraculous life she had fought so hard to protect. Then everything went black. When Eleanor awoke, the world was a blur of white. The starched white sheets of a bed, the whitewashed walls of a room she didn't recognize, the town doctor's office. The first thing she felt was the dull, throbbing ache in her shoulder. The second thing she felt was Jacob's hand holding hers. He was sitting in a chair beside the bed, his head bowed. He looked like he had aged 10 years. "Jacob?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. His head snapped up. Relief washed over his face, so powerful it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Eleanor, you're awake." "The baby?" was her first question. "The baby's fine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The doctor said you were lucky. The bullet went clean through. Missed anything vital." He told her what had happened after she'd been shot. The sheriff's posse had stormed the room. Silas Kane was dead. One of his men was dead, the other captured, and Ethan McCready. In his madness, he had turned his reloaded shotgun on himself. It was over. All of it. The threats, the fear, the violence. It had all ended in that one bloody hotel room. "Marianne?" Eleanor asked. "She's safe," Jacob said. "The sheriff put her on the first stagecoach out of town this morning. She's going to start a new life somewhere far away from here." He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "She told me, that you pushed her out of the way, that you took the bullet that was meant for her." "She's my sister," Eleanor said simply. They were quiet for a long moment. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, filling the room with a warm, golden light. "Eleanor," Jacob said, his voice low and serious, "when I saw you fall, when I thought I'd lost you, I realized something. I realized I can't live without you. I don't want to." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple gold band. It wasn't new. It was worn and faded. "This was my mother's," he said. "I want you to have it. I know this isn't the right time or the right place, but I can't wait another minute to ask you. Eleanor Whitfield, will you marry me? Will you be my wife? Will you make our child legitimate and our family whole?" Tears, hot and happy, spilled from her eyes and ran down her temples. For the first time since she had stepped off that train, a woman full of shame and secrets, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had come to this harsh, unforgiving land, expecting nothing but rejection, and she had found love. She had faced down death and disgrace, and she had found a home. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Yes, Jacob, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. A few months later, as the first autumn rains finally came to bless the thirsty land, Eleanor stood on the porch of the Harlan Ranch. She was no longer Eleanor Whitfield, the rejected bride. She was Eleanor Harlan, wife and soon-to-be mother. The valley was slowly coming back to life, the brown hills showing the first faint blush of green. The scars from the drought and the fire remained, but they were healing, just like her own scars. The town of Bitter Creek, shocked into a new kind of respect by the shootout and Jacob's fierce devotion to her, had finally accepted her. Adelaide Morrison now nodded politely when they passed on the street. Little Timothy Reed still brought her wildflowers from the fields. She rested a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the strong, steady kick of her child. Their child, a symbol of the new life that could grow even in the hardest of places. Jacob came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her, resting his chin on her good shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "I was just thinking," she said, leaning back against him, "that sometimes the package you get isn't the one you ordered, but it turns out to be the one you needed all along." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Eleanor Harlan. I love you too, Jacob." They stood there together, watching the rain fall on their land, a family forged in fire and faith. The past was a ghost, and the future was an open prairie, full of hardship, yes, but also full of a fierce, unyielding hope. They had survived. And they would do more than survive. They would thrive. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the wild heart of the American West. The story of Jacob and Eleanor is a powerful reminder that love can blossom in the most unexpected places, and that true strength is often found in the face of our greatest fears. What was your favorite part of their story? Did you see the final twist coming? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing from you. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of frontier justice, unlikely heroes, and epic romance, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay safe and remember to look for the miracles.